Each passing day, we continue to unravel the realities of the global world, especially in the aspect of international politics. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this weekend edition of your discursive, informative, and knowledge sharing program. It is Global Insight. And today we are looking at war as a geopolitical tool for control, now diving deep into the tactics. According to geographers, the world is a sphere. Historians believe that history always repeats itself, and in international politics, war remains a means to an end and not an end in itself. That is why today's world, which is complex, is reliving the eras of the first, second, and the Cold Wars. It is different now in the 21st century because it is occurring in a multipolar world with many actors, unlike in the past where the United States of America was the major actor at play in a unipolar setting. This edition, ladies and gentlemen, of Global Insight, therefore, dives deep into the intricate web of international relations and geopolitics with the complex theme of war as a geopolitical tool for control, understanding the tactics. According to report, as we take a walk down history's memory lane, it becomes obvious that war has long been viewed not just as a means to resolve dispute, but as an enduring instrument of power and authority on the global stage. Renowned political theorist Carl von Clausewitz stated that war, and I quote, war is the continuation of politics by other means, framing war as a political tool rather than an isolated event. In today's complex society, war takes on various forms, ranging from military conflict, trade wars, proxy wars, information warfare, biological warfare, among other aspects of it. Thus, today's edition of Global Insider seeks to understand the underlying tactics that states employ to maintain control, drive competition, and achieve their objectives. And we also look at the global ramifications of war on the population as a whole. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This with a panel of experts, we're going to understand into defining the key terms and looking at war as a major feature of international politics and relations. And after the jingle, we'll uncover the panel and dive straight away to the analysis. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. What is war? What are the various types of war? And of course, how can we understand war as a feature of international politics? Now, we are going to, first of all, uncover the panel that will give us clearer understanding on this very complex topic. War as a tool of political or geopolitical control that states do use in line with the global setting and shifting dynamics. And let me welcome Yulia Burke, of course, joining us from Moscow in Russia. She's a political scientist, also founder of Global Expert Club. Welcome to Global Insight this day, dear Yulia.
Hello, dear everyone, and I'm very happy to join today's program.
It's a pleasure that you had time to join us today as we continue to educate the global world on the realities of this world. And moving from Russia, let's make a stop in Washington, D.C. to welcome Mr. Ashil Eke, a corporate finance expert CEO, Washington Valuation Group. It's a pleasure having you on the program this day.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Clarice, for the invitation. The topic is very, very interesting, and I think 2 hours is not going to be enough for what we have to say, considering the panel, the quality of expert we have here. So we can do this maybe for the entire month. That is still not going to be enough, but thank you for the invitation. We are going to try to be succinct, right to the point.
Absolutely, it's going to be enough for us to share, the valuable insights already. But then subsequently, we'll continue to bring the topic on discussion so as to educate the world at large. And we also now move to Germany. Let's welcome Dean Andromedas, co-editor ERLIR Strategic Alert. Hello to you, dear Dean. Welcome to Global Insight.
Hello, Clarice. I'm very happy to be here again. And the topic, of course, is more than timely, since we have quite a few wars to talk about. And the whole geopolitical outlook is probably the leading cause of these wars. So I'm looking forward to listening to the other speakers as well.
Absolutely. And that's why we call it a knowledge sharing program, to be able to understand different perspectives of today's global world and make decisions based on the realities and not on traditional rules that have been set for us. And we welcome another lady, Christelle Niet, who is a war reporter, deputy editor-in-chief, International Reporters. It's a pleasure having you this day.
Hello, happy to be here with you.
Looking forward to having, a very constructive discussion, especially as you have firsthand information on the ground of what war, especially military war, looks like. And we also acknowledge the presence of Halle Schlenger, who is joining from Berlin. He's an international spokesperson, Schiller Institute. And welcome to the program, dear Halle.
Well, Clarissa, thank you very much for your invitation. I send my greetings to the other panelists, and I'm looking forward to a really scintillating, inspiring discussion.
Absolutely. And of course, I stay with you, dear Ellie, as we are going to dive deep into the topic for discussion. Then we'll first of all have this brief presentation from you, actually focusing on changing imperial geopolitics design for Africa then and now, before we go into the war as a future of international politics and its ramifications.
Well, I think Dean said that war is usually the extension of geopolitical doctrine.
Yeah.
I would say the geopolitical doctrine serves imperial interests. And the whole idea of geopolitics is how to divide nations against each other, divide nations internally, religious, tribal, various kinds of identity breakups. And geopolitics was essentially a British invention for controlling the empire that they had. And I chose to talk about Africa first because Africa has been a target of predatory imperialist looters from the 15th century to the present. The method of looting has changed and the method of causing the wars has changed, but the intent has remained the same: to extract the maximum amount of wealth from the African continent for the smallest cost. That's the old British concept of buy cheap and sell dear. Now, today what we're dealing with is a situation where the competition over raw materials is higher than ever. And the demand, as you pointed out, Clarice, of the unipolar order for the lion's share of those resources has put it at odds with the growing sovereignty movement of the global south. So I just wanted to give a brief summary of what Africa has faced in terms of geopolitics, because it gives us a very good picture of what this whole fight is about. The question of why Africa has become an increasing target of imperial geopolitics, all you have to do is look at some of the figures. You have almost a quarter of the world's agricultural land located in Africa, 30% or more of known mineral resources, over 10% of oil and natural gas, and by 2030, 42% of the world's youth will be in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say that there's looting going on, the looting included for a long time slavery, but it still continues with the cheap labor attempt by the International Monetary and World Trade Organization and others to take advantage of African labor. Now, the situation, just to situate it, let me just mention the importance of Cecil Rhodes as part of this imperial geopolitics. He authorized the use of force and violence to sustain control. The Rhodes operation, I just will bring up a funny point to it. Lord Balfour of the Balfour Declaration told the House of Commons that Rhodes' investments in Africa will, in rail and telegraph, perform the basis for the development of Africa. Now, when he said that before the House of Commons, virtually the whole House broke down in laughter because they knew that Rhodes was a thief and a looter, and he had no interest in developing Africa for the people.
Mm-hmm.
But that represents, in a sense, what we're dealing with when you talk about geopolitics and imperial geopolitics. What Rhodes said in terms of the defense of why Britain should have an empire, he said, the British are the greatest people the world has ever seen, but we do not know our strength, our greatness, or our destiny. So this is the idea of being the anointed by the Lord to take over the resources and use them for the benefit of the British people. Now, on geopolitics, we have to start with Mackinder. And he gave the famous speech in 1904 of the geopolitical pivot of history. Now, it's notable that he didn't really include much about Africa in his evaluation of the world's powers, of the world's countries. But he did acknowledge that Africa has a potential power due to its agricultural land, raw materials, and so on. And he said Africa's geography has a potential in shaping future geopolitical matters.
Mm-hmm.
And so his idea was that while Africa was not an immediate target, it would become a target, largely because it's at the, it intersects both Europe and the Central Asia.
Sure.
And as a result, can be connected to Eurasia. That was Mackinder's whole idea.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, the British saw holding places in Africa as of great value. Of course, so did the French and the Belgians and others.
Mm-hmm.
Now, then let me just give you a more recent example of this, what Clarice identified correctly as the unipolar order.
Yeah.
And one of those moments was in 1975, when the United States released a document called National Security Study Memo 200, under the auspices of Henry Kissinger, who was the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor.
Mm-hmm.
And what it argued is that there are implications of worldwide population growth for U.S. security and overseas interests. And what did he say in that? The population growth and he identified 13 countries. He said that these are countries that as they grow, their people are going to demand that they have sovereign control over their own resources. And this will threaten the resources needed for the advanced sector. This became the actual doctrine of the United States under the Ford administration. It was a classified document. The African countries that he mentioned were Nigeria, Egypt, and Ethiopia. And additionally, he mentioned Pakistan, Bangladesh, Mexico, and others. And what he argued is that as population growth continues, there's a threat to the availability of the resources needed, especially for the advanced sector countries. And therefore, the West needs to come up with a policy for reducing the population growth in these countries that are growing. Now, what's one of the best ways to do that? War and civil war.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made the point, I wanted to start this by just saying that when you're looking at the danger of war, you have to look at the intent.
Absolutely.
It's not just that there's animosity between different peoples, different religions, and so on. There is an intent, and the intent of the imperial geopoliticians is to make sure that the resources exist for their cartels. And that's the example of Cecil Rhodes, who had one kind of way of enforcing it back then. Go to the 50s and Brigadier General Frank Kitson and irregular warfare, a slightly different approach. Today, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, they still value the benefits to the cartels over and above the benefits to any nation. And the thing that's changed, and that's especially threatening to them, to the imperialists, is the emergence of leaders in the global south, including in Africa, who are standing up and fighting for the sovereign development of their resources for their own people. And now with the BRICS, they have an opportunity to stand up against the Western or global North imperial powers. And so that's what we're looking at when we see geopolitical conflict leading to war today. In my view, there's no interest for any African country to go to war against another African country.
Absolutely.
The problem comes about when you have the West coming in and telling the Africans how you have to develop. And my final point here is that I think Naledi Pandor did a service to all people in the world, not just for Africans, but the whole world. She's a former foreign minister of South Africa. When Secretary of State Tony Blinken came to South Africa and started lecturing her on how South Africa should function in the world, she said, "Excuse me, sir, we're a sovereign nation. Don't come here to lecture us about your democracy." And that's the challenge and the threat to the West. They see China and Russia moving in and helping African countries develop. And I think this is the greatest potential for change, for positive change in the world in probably over 5 centuries.
Absolutely, which is very imperative understanding the contextual framework of the subject matter to understand why today we see war that is very prevalent across the globe. And we are going to continue in the same perspective to put to context our topic for discussion. I will leave for Holly with you now, Julia Burke. We want to have a contextual understanding of the war and international politics, of course, where you gather some very pertinent examples from the Russia-Ukraine crisis.
Well, war is a part of politics, and I completely agree with Harley Schlanger, who just spoke that it was being used as a tool for mostly for achieving such aims as getting access to resources or depopulating certain territories or destroying economies or even civilizations. And unfortunately, lately, we see a great increase in the amount of wars. Some of them are quite rapid time-wise. Some of them are taking years and years. But we see the destruction that was brought to Libya, for instance, that was once, and let's say just recently, that was a flourishing state with developed social policy and quite developed economy and ambition for establishing a new Pan-African system that would not depend on colonial powers and that would allow for creation of own sovereign economic foundations, let's put it that way. And we saw, unfortunately, quite a lot of examples when civil wars were ignited and initiated in order to once again divide and conquer and achieve the goals of receiving the access to resources. But now the wars have also transitioned and they have transformed into many other shapes, including informational wars, when psychological warfare becomes one of the key issues. And sometimes it serves as a foundation for physical or military operations, but sometimes it just stays at that level. Sometimes it just stays at that level and it destroys societies from the very inside. So I think it's one of the aspects that is also worth talking about today. And I see that there are quite a lot of experts who could elaborate on this even more.
which is very imperative, of course, looking at how maybe the historical perspectives on war as a political tool transcend to the realities of today's world. I think I will come to you, Ashil Eki, to look at it from the African perspective, because when we have a topic like this on the table, we begin to understand what actually was the intention behind, like Halim mentioned in his analysis. When you look at war, what is the intention? Because from a research across the African continent, you will discover that, war has increased across the continent, crisis per se. And then when you look at the diplomatic confrontations and even the physical confrontations that we have, you begin to ask if there is a clear understanding of what war and geopolitics is all about, and what it means to the African dream of total continental integration. Today we are looking at Sudan in ruins. We are still looking at Libya that has not regained its glory since the fall of then President Muammar Gaddafi. So with your own perspective, Ashil Eki, we want to have a holistic understanding of war and looking at it from the perspective of a multipolar society.
Well, thank you, Clarice. Well, this topic is very broad. We can approach it in different angles.
Absolutely.
Well, I would say that with regard to Africa, Africa is really living in a situation where it's what's happening in the continent is the consequences of so many events that are beyond African control that happen in Africa. Mm-hmm. And that are plaguing that continent, until today. And so it's a situation that if we have to analyze it, we have to go far behind. In the post-colonial era, most likely, the slavery area, and then colonial area, and then a new colonization area. So it's very, when we talk about war in Africa, especially viewed from our point of view, point of view of Pan-Africanists that we hear today, they are not just regional crises, right? So they are profound disruptions to the dreams of unity, of self-determination, and even dignity for African people. So the burden of conflict and all these disruptions is deeply intertwined with the continent's legacy of colonialism, slavery, and all that stuff. And also all these foreign interventions that we see all the time from various superpowers and different powers around the world. Mm-hmm. And also the ongoing project of nation building, that is often compromised by different divisions within our borders, and those are usually, influenced by external forces that also, have an impact, on these, on the local decisions that we're supposed to make independently. But most African borders, as we know, were drawn during colonial era, and so with little regard to ethnic or cultural or historical realities that we live in. So therefore, the groundwork for disputes, for conflicts, and different competing claims from different parties are fueled today by these decisions that were made, by external forces. So it's fair to say that foreign interests, especially driven by, ambition, extractive ambition, power, control, and looking for resources, that they can use for the benefit of their lands or the people in their lands. All these influences are turning local dispute into proxy wars that are called outright that are also called armed interventions. So I would say in too many cases, Africa's war became, battlegrounds for global powers to deprive Africans of their resources and then create a situation that they have total control to allow them to be able to use those resources indefinitely. But there's a new breed of Africans today, the Pan-Africanists, the people who are waking up and trying to fight back, and so for those people, the solution lies not in the external prescription, but in the solidarity, the self-determination, and also the political integration of African peoples and different nations that constitute the continent. So Pan-Africanist or Pan-Africanism calls for the economic, the cultural, and even political integration of the continent. Also for refusal to allow divisions. Whether they're coming from historical situations, historical situation that we had no control of, or defined today by the different interests of the world that we see today.
Okay.
So for Pan-Africanists, the solution that has to recognize that true progress comes from African-led consensus, regional corporations, and the gradual realization of the African continent.
And of course, rewriting the continent's foreign policy. And
Exactly.
coming to you, Dean, is still in the same light. Let us understand, help our millions of viewers out there to understand the concept of war and why what is happening today is a continuation from, the events of the past, like we highlighted in the preamble, that history is actually repeating itself. But this time around, in a more complex and multipolar setting. Let's have your own historical and contextual understanding of our topic for today, looking at understanding the tactics of war as a tool of control. Hello, Dean.
Your
You-
mic. Your microphone.
Your mic is muted, please.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I would like to give an historic example and show how that is, as you just said, repeating itself. As Harley said earlier, the actual inventor of, one of the inventors of geopolitics, of course, is Alfred Mackinder. And he wrote his seminal paper is The Geographical Pivot of History. And this he wrote in 1904. This is a very interesting year. What you see what followed it. And of course, geopolitics is just a different way, is a way of trying to make British imperialism polite discussion among people. So he goes through all sorts of things about history and blah, blah, blah. But what caught my mind is, what caught my attention was right in the middle of this, because the whole paper is actually a polemic against the Russian Empire. Mm-hmm. And he writes right in the middle of this, he said that the great problem, the great failure of the Roman Empire was to Latinize the Greeks. And therefore, it was the Greeks that Christianized the Russians and the Slavs. And this, he defines this as a great problem. And I found it rather interesting because this is the cultural warfare of the British, because the Greek Orthodox Church, Orthodoxy, is not just the religion of Greece and Russia, but it is the Christianity of the East. The Orthodox churches, as you know, are throughout the Middle East. There's Armenia, there's Georgia. In Africa, there's Ethiopia. And these are all the countries that were one way or another targeted. And then right after this, he talks about the whole question of continental railways. He laments the fact that he says that of course the British Empire was built, and that building accelerated with the opening of the Suez Canal on maritime trade. The British Empire basically captured maritime trade. But he says that with the advent of continental railways, and at that time there were only two continental railways, one in the Russian Empire and one in the United States. He says this has transformed trade. No longer is sea trade, no longer will sea trade be prominent, because with railroads crisscrossing the entire length and breadth of Eurasia, this would allow the transport of goods directly from the exporting factory to the importing warehouse, without having to go through different operations in order to put it on a ship, take it to a ship. The ship goes to another port. Another train has to take it from that port to bring it to the customer. Mm-hmm. But with continental railways, this operation is direct. And he laments the fact that within a few decades, he says, railroads would be crisscrossing throughout Eurasia. Yeah. And this enormous area, basically the Russian Empire and China, is so rich with resources and would have so much potential. And we, as a naval power, marine power, would have no access to it because we can't bring the British Navy into Central Asia. And this is the big challenge for the empire. So that's quite clear. I mean, he doesn't say directly we have to conquer Russia, but it's quite clear. And if you realize what happened just a few months after the publication of this paper, the British ally in the Pacific, Japan, whose fleet was basically built by Great Britain, went to war against Russia in the Pacific. They sank the Russian fleet, and they defeated Russia in Manchuria in a very, very bloody war for both sides. That totally destabilized Russia. You had the 1905 revolution, and of course, that war was followed by World War I and the Russian Revolution. And the world, and if you look at a map of the world, and I want to see if I can share my screen.
Okay.
You have it?
No.
Yes, please, I see it.
Okay, you can see it from there. All right.
You can see it, okay.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be so clear, but this is a map that we published, and it's called the Eurasian Land Bridge. And it extends all the way into Africa and all the way into South America. And if you look at what's happening now, I should say one thing that was extremely interesting at the August summit in Alaska. One of the big issues that came up for discussion was building a Bering Straits tunnel. And that would have linked, if that is built and it's in discussion, the President Trump said it's a good idea, and the Russians, of course, have been holding feasibility studies, et cetera, et cetera. And this would be a fantastic project, and would establish a very peaceful relationship between the United States and Russia. But you see this whole region here. What do we see today? We see Ukraine, which is a key east-west, was a key east-west point for the Trans-Siberian Railway. I mean, what has happened since 2013 is the implementation of Xi Jinping, the Chinese president's Belt and Road Initiative, which is precisely the idea of building transcontinental railways. Now, this is broken as far as almost totally broken as far as Europe is concerned, at least via Russia, because of the Ukraine conflict. And you have the Middle East. Since the invention of railroads, why has not been a railroad connecting the Middle East or Southwest Asia and Europe with Africa? Because for the last, as we all know, for the last 50 years, there's been a war here in the Middle East. There's been a series of wars. And the same thing now in Africa. If you go down and you look at the paths of these proposed rail lines that would unify all of Africa and make the Pan-African dream a reality, what do we see? We see wars. Or I should say wars against these governments using terrorism, et cetera.
Absolutely.
So I think this is what this is the repetition of history, and this is the reason why we have to destroy the idea of geopolitics and get back to the idea of economic cooperation to bring the world together again. Okay, I leave it at that.
Okay, and of course, having a better understanding, the historical understanding of how wars are being shaped and the intention behind it will help a lot in the 21st century. And then with new, level of leadership to understand the dynamics of international politics, so as not to be held in the web of ignorance while navigating the complex global world of politics. And to you, Crystal, you actually have lived not just first time, but then first-hand reality of a war zone, as you've been very keen, following up the proxy war between Russia and Ukraine. And from your own perspective, we'll appreciate if you take your field experience to give us a holistic understanding of this proxy war and how it presents war as a feature of international politics or a tool for maybe powers to define their gains, fame, and control over states or resources.
Thank you. No, we see with the conflict between Russia and Ukraine that war is not only a way to access resources to one of the parties. In this case, it's even to both of the parties, because Ukraine is also a country which has a lot of resources, including agricultural land and what's underground. Ukraine has a lot of coal, of gas, a lot of interesting minerals. I mean, all have remembered this mineral deals between Ukraine and its British and then American partners. But we have seen that this war is not only good for the West to impoverish and destroy or limit the quantity of people. We see that the losses, for example, of the Ukrainian sides are really heavy. And despite this, on the Western side, they still want to continue this war because the more Slavic people are dying, the better it is for them. But we see also that this war is also used as a geopolitical tool by the US to prevent, for example, the European Union countries to develop, to become a competitor. This war has been used as an excuse to push countries of the European Union to put sanctions, which in the end are much more bad for their own economies than for the Russian ones. The restrictions of the Nord Streams, for example, and all the sanctions which have been taken have pushed countries like Germany out from a very strong link with Russia, which was helping develop their economy in a very competitive way. And the result, we see it now, is that the economy of the main countries of European Union, like Germany, like France, and so on, is now into recession. And so it's also a good point for the initiators of this war, is not only they are destroying Ukraine, they are destroying Russia. They are preventing the development of the population and of the economy of these both countries. That's what they want. We remember all these speeches about putting the Russian economy on its knees. For example, from the French economy minister.
Yeah.
But we see that it also, in reality, had put on its knees the economy of the main countries of the European Union, which is fully benefits from the US. And so we see that war is not only a tool to influence the direct participants to this conflict, it's also a way to inflict very big damages, for example, here to the economy of third parties, of countries which are not on the battlefield, like Germany and France, and putting them into recession, thus preventing them to become a fierce competitor for the US. And on the contrary, this conflict helped the United States putting themselves first as a good provider of gas, for example, for Europe, while before they were not competitive. So they have taken market shares by force, and they have destroyed potential competitors. So it's full benefit for them. So they have not only influenced the destiny of Ukraine and of Russia, they have also influenced the destiny of the whole European Union thanks to this conflict. And we see now that they are pushing this hysteria to even try to push European Union at war with Russia, while there is no objective and serious reason to do so. But it's also a very good tool to censor all the dissident speeches, all the people who are in the oppositions of the current authorities. And it's also a good way to erase the debt, not paying it. Most countries of the European Union have now a debt level which is unsustainable completely. And so the war is also a good way for them to justify all the most unpopular measures, to take the money from people in ways which in peacetime would never be accepted. So within the war is a very complex tool which is able not only to destroy the two or it sometimes can be more countries involved, but usually it's two, But there we see that it's also a tool to destroy a third party, which is pushed to recession. And plus, the United States are now using, how could we say, as a bank to provide the money to pay for the weapons of one of the party, it's Ukraine, while receiving absolutely no benefit from all this conflict. On the contrary. So we see that war is really a very complex and a very useful tool for people who want to keep control of how the world is working, for them to continue to not only obtain the resources they want, but also continue to develop their economies in a, how to say, non-loyal way, by destroying their competitors on the side of this conflict.
Which is very problematic, and which brings us to another question that will be answered subsequently, as war as both a hard power and soft power tool for control in the international dynamics of politics. Coming back to you swiftly, Hale, from the presentation you made, it brings us to want to understand better, because we are in the era of having alternative source of information that will create that balance between what has been told to be the reality and the new perspectives, which meet actually the present realities of the world, where we have new global powers emerging. We want to look at the likes of the role that Henry Kissinger, whom you mentioned in your discuss, played, and other officials. Let's take the example of the Ukraine war, because this is something that has caught not just the attention of in Europe, but the global attention, bringing us down even to the African continent. And many at times people do ask questions like, you are an African, why take more focus on what is happening, far away from you? And I would love us to really understand how the effect of decisions made by great powers will affect not just countries, immediate countries, but it would transcend and even have, affect the living standard of the common person on the street, who knows even nothing about, the agenda or trajectory of war and control. Please, your mic is muted.
There. Okay. That's a broad question, so I want to narrow down a couple aspects of it because of the time considerations. But I think if you look at the question of geopolitics leading to war, what's the alternative? It's the idea of mutual benefit. And this goes back to a war, the end of the 30 Years' War in Europe in 1648, with the Peace of Westphalia, where they said that nations should work together for mutual benefit, to treat other nations the way they would like to be treated. And this put an end to religious war for some period of time in Europe, although not fully. But there's an interesting thing that happened in 1999. Tony Blair came to the United States and gave a speech, and he said, the era of Westphalia is over. Instead, we have to have a doctrine which is now known as the responsibility to protect. If a country has a government which we disagree with, and we're a superpower, we have a right to go in and overthrow it. Now, this is an excuse for regime change. You talk about Ukraine. What started the situation in Ukraine? It was, on the one side, it was NATO expansion. But on the other side, it was the regime change coup against the Yanukovych government. And who funded that? It was the Americans and the British. And what was one of the weapons they used in that? It was psychological warfare. It's the idea of, on one side, censorship, and on the other side, basically lying, propaganda. And as Dean mentioned, Ukraine is located in a part of Europe which is somewhat, could be a bridge between Europe and Eurasia. And instead of having Europe and Eurasia cooperating, which would mean the idea that de Gaulle had of a Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals, and then you can extend that to the Pacific. Instead, you have Eurasia at war. The same thing is what they're trying to do in Africa, what they've done in Africa in the past. And we're seeing in the former French colonies in West Africa an attempt to pull together a collaboration with Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, which is an anti-colonial commitment to working together. Now imagine if we had a cooperation among the states of Africa with the resources, with the numbers of youth, with the potential, working for the benefit of the other nations. It wouldn't matter what the US and the British and the French and others want to do. Those countries could stand up on their own. And that's the whole idea of the Belt and Road Initiative, of the emergence of the Global South. That's the idea of Pan-Africanism, that if you work together for common interest, the imperial forces are weak. They count on internal struggles and fights, and if they can't get you to go to war, they'll do regime change coups. They'll fund terrorism. You know, the famous case of the French, when they went into French West Africa, the amount of terrorism increased when they were supposedly going there to fight it. The US funding of the ISIS and Al-Qaeda movement to topple Assad is another example. So how do you counter that? And this is where we have a potential right now to bring real peace to the Middle East, not by signing some vague ceasefire agreement, but by working together to desalinate the water that comes from the Mediterranean and the Red Sea and can be through a series of canals from the Sinai on into Israel and Jordan and so on, desalinate water to create enough fresh water to green the desert. That would be a project which Israel and Palestine could do together. That kind of project is how you overcome the anger and the vengeance, which we've seen driving the situation there. And so I think we have a number of test cases where this could work. We'll see what happens with Ukraine and Russia. I think President Putin has made an offer which the Ukrainians would be foolish not to accept. So mutual benefit as opposed to imperial geopolitics. And to me, that's the whole importance of the Pan-African movement as an example. But it should be extended. It's not just for Africa, because to survive, it's going to need help from the rest of the world, and especially non-interference from the Western colonial powers.
Quite important. Just to note that, ladies and gentlemen, if you are just tuning in, this is Global Insight brought to you by Globals, and we're analyzing war as a geopolitical tool, understanding the tactics. So actually, I think this is actually a platform to learn, to unlearn, and of course, to define narratives that will shape the present global world setting. Coming back to you, dear Yulia, we're still trying to understand clearly the place of war and its its effects that we cannot enumerate. Now let's look at the aspect of ideological war, which you highlighted in your first analysis, because when we are analyzing the forms of war, we're talking about ideological war. And I know that you have been very keen with this global transformation, especially in line with understanding the new narratives shaping the new world order. So how can we probably align the existing world order with the new perspectives, and then understanding how this ideological warfare occurs, so as to be conversant on probably how to navigate such situations, not to be confused in amidst all the complexities shaping the world.
Yes, those attacks on the very core, the attacks on the value systems, the attacks on things that used to be considered simple, the attacks through social media, through traditional media, basically propaganda that is integrated into movies and various kinds of cultural content and content that is supposed to be neutral.
Yeah.
All this creates a great confusion in people's minds, and it makes them lose their ethics, it makes them lose their moral values, it makes them disorientate in simple things and, generally speaking, in living their lives, right? Because when we see quite a lot of those examples, and I mean starting from destruction of family values and various perversions and attacks within the religious context, and religion being used as one of the manipulation tools as well to a great extent. And when we see the COVID and the example of how panic was basically implanted into people's mindset, and this also allowed for increasing control tremendously, especially when we're talking about the countries in Europe. So the major cleanup within the civil society, the various kinds of activists and the kind of people that used to be public and voicing their critical opinions, it all was happening during the pandemic, when everyone was made to wear masks and stay at home, and various kinds of protests that were attempted to take place in countries like Germany and Austria and many others, they were just canceled, and the people who were taking part in organizing such critical events, some of them were imprisoned, arrested, or else everything was done for them to lose their position in the society, in some cases jobs, in some cases access to finance and whatsoever else. So of course it's a very it could be perceived as quite a controversial topic, yet at the same time we see that the level of consent and the level of, let's say, civil obedience, not in a good way, in Europe has changed a lot after the pandemic, because it was on top of everything else, it was a major psychological war against its own population, aimed to set additional means of control. But once the war in Ukraine started, once it was taken to a new level, everyone kind of forgot about it. And what is quite sad is that all of the corruption scandals around it also were not really discussed as they should have been, and investigations have not really achieved the results of pointing out who was guilty and applying the punishment to them. But in any case, the point I'm trying to make here is that the psychological warfare is even more dangerous, because it does have an effect on people, on how they raise their children, and it has this generational effect that leads to certain deformations. And we definitely could see this happening. We definitely could see this happening in Ukraine, and we could see this happening in many countries in Africa, for example, in Rwanda and many other ones. And unfortunately, we're still observing quite a lot of examples of bully in order to control and conquer and make people do what they don't really want to do.
Absolutely. So it's actually very tactical and complex at the same time. Coming to you, Mr. Ashil, okay, we now have understood how this ideological or psychological warfare actually works, and the spiral effect of it. So let's come back to the context of the African continent. I think 2 weeks ago we were on the topic of the value of Pan-Africanism in the 21st century, still looking at its relevance. And then when we want to look at the ideological warfare, let's try to contextualize it with your own perspective, be it especially from the economic perspective, to understand why, likes like President Paul Kagame of Rwanda always say, among other leaders, that Africa's total transformation will start with the drastic change or shift in the mindset to probably redefine the continent's position, not just in Africa, but at the international arena in terms of international politics. Let's understand your perspective on this. You're muted, please.
Yes, thank you, Clarice. When it comes to wars, it's always perceived differently depending on what side you are on the war, right? So,
Absolutely.
wars. When it comes to wars, especially on the economic side of it, it's a big business, right? It's a big business. People go to war because they have different economic incentives. For example, resources. We mentioned resources, especially when it comes to Africa, who owns a great part of the world raw materials. Oil and energy is one of the things that have been attractive in Africa. So many wars have been fought in Africa because of that. Strategic minerals, we see that in Congo. For technology, IT, AI, artificial intelligence, rare earth, things like that. You got agricultural lands that in Africa provides, and there's so many companies are looking to use those lands, to their benefit, and so when it also comes to market access and trade rules, there is a vast array of opportunities that the African continent offers to different, different investors or different countries or different interest groups who might be interested in using them, in taking advantage of those opportunities. But in order for them to have access, they have to fund wars. We've talked about earlier about the U.S. and financing ISIS, to topple the government in Syria and other government. We talked about France, financing all these terrorist groups. It's why are they doing that? That's because France's economy is in shambles right now, and all the bad decisions they took with regard to the Ukraine war. As Christelle Nea mentioned earlier, they thought they would be able to cripple Russia's economy, by sanctioning Russia and then going to war economically with Russia. But it turns out Russia was prepared somehow, and they were able to navigate all these sanctions. How many? We talk about 10,000 sanctions that Russia is living with today, and so it's a way for those countries to be able to find ways to get out of their own difficult internal situations. For example, debt. In the case of Europeans, France, for example, they have so much debt, and so when it comes to resources like oil and gas, countries that like Germany, we don't understand exactly why they will accept, a situation like that to be cut out of Russian oil when they need that for the economy, for their industries, for the leadership in Europe in terms of economy. But coming back to Africa, I think African countries are beginning now to understand that, well, it's no more enough to be able to sell raw materials. We have to be able to, create our own industries. We have to be able to refine those products and sell the product, the finished product, so we can get more value, more added value on those resources. And you can see from different countries now, different areas, many countries, especially organizations like African Bank, the African Bank, that are strongly recommending that many African countries, instead of selling raw materials, they should be able to transform those raw materials in the continent, so they can provide more, or they can get more resources, so they can develop the continent. And so it's a movement that is happening all over the place in Africa now, that is hopeful for the youth, especially a continent that has over 40% of the population that is young. And those people, they're going to need resources, they're going to need energy, they're going to need industries to work. And so we have everything that we have on the continent that could satisfy those needs, but they are not well used. And there are so many influences that are also impacting those decisions. And also the leadership that we currently have, they're not the right leaders that we need for the continent right now. So it's a lot of things that need to be, we have so many different issues that we need to solve, so we can come to a position where we can really harness the resources that we have, the power of our youth, and so that with the economic might that we or the different strategies that we can put in place, so that we can maximize on all the resources to make Africa the place to be in the future. But it's going to take some time, and that process is ongoing, and we are very hopeful that sooner or later we are going to get to that place. But so far, we see what's going on with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso as a template of for us to be able to analyze and maybe expand on that in the whole continent, so that gives us more opportunities for other countries.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, it is not going without distraction. Like we had recently about the reports of increased insecurity in Mali or in the Sahel region. And then we want to understand this security warfare, which is at play at this juncture. So at any particular moment, it is very imperative for actors or those at the helm to bring forth tactics that will handle all the challenges that will probably come with this type of radical independence, especially as far as controlling resources are concerned. And that brings us to the next question, which I will direct to you, Dean. We are looking at war here as a future of international politics, in both as a hard power and as well as a soft power, to understand how resistance can, gaining independence can create another aspect of, of soft power war in a country, like we just highlighted the situation in the Sahel. And then there is a recent situation happening in Nigeria. We note that the United States, under its President Donald Trump, recently has made a stern statement about going to Nigeria, highlighting what he called Christian genocide. And it has actually attracted diverse perspectives patterning whatever thing should be happening in Nigeria. So I want to look at this future of international politics, which is war, and how it is being maneuvered with the internal challenges of a nation to meet that intention of a superpower or those at the helm in terms of power, control, and of resources and minerals. Your mic is muted, please.
I just want to preface this with a statement on Pan-Africanism, because that's African unity is absolutely necessary if these people are to be defeated. And the great Senegalese Pan-Africanist Sheikh Anta Diop, he said that there's only, in 1980, in an interview in 1980, he said there's only 3 countries in the world that are actually independent. And he said it's the United States, the Soviet Union, and China. They're the only independent countries because they're the only continental countries. And I think this is, and of course, this begs the question for Africa. If Africa was a confederated state, unified from the Mediterranean to Cape Town, no one can push it around. It has all the resources it needs
Yes.
to develop itself. Now, of course, this is the nightmare. Such a development is the nightmare of the West, particularly the New York City, the Wall Street, and the London-based financial establishment, which thrives on speculating on the commodities that they're stealing in Africa. And what they do is they use terrorism. And the colonial powers, they use, I mean, they've been there for 100 years. They were there for sometimes 200 or 300 years. So they know all the tricks. We take, for instance, in Mali and the other countries of the Confederation of Sahel states, they're fighting these terrorists. Now, the terrorists are actually tribes that have been living off. Well, they survived through smuggling, and these terrorists are the same people who are smuggling cocaine from Colombia. It comes into West Africa and then it goes through the Sahel to the Mediterranean and across to Europe. What's even more interesting is I looked at one of these, the main terrorist group there, and it's interesting that this leader, this terror group, it's based on a very specific tribe. I mean, there's like 10, 20 different tribes. And this is precisely the tribe that the French used during the colonial period, when they controlled this area as part of their Algerian and North African and Sahel empire. The way they controlled these tribes, which were always raiding the settled areas of their colonies, is that they sponsored one tribe to keep control over the other tribes. And this is precisely the tribe that the terrorism is based on. So that's one way it works. I mean, the British know this very, very well. Another example, you mentioned Nigeria. I was just doing some research, and I think our friends in Nigeria know this, but there's a Biafran, in Biafra, the so-called Biafra region of Nigeria, which is in the south, which is also where the oil is. People old enough who remember the Nigerian Civil War, there was a struggle to create a Biafran state, to rip it out of Nigeria and make a separate state. Luckily, this of course was totally backed from outside Nigeria. That was defeated, but it still goes on. And there's a group which is leading this struggle, which is called the Biafran Republic Government in Exile. Its leader has just been convicted in a court in Finland for terrorism, for sending weapons to this region of Nigeria to carry out terrorist actions, claiming they want to liberate their country. Now, this man, before he was incarcerated in Finland, he was in the United States. And he signed a contract with an American lobbying firm called Moran. Well, it was a lobbying firm founded by American Congressman Jim Moran, the Democratic Party congressman. And it's a lobby group that is basically associated with the Democrats. They're all Democrats. And this lobby group gets $10,000 a month. I don't know where the Biafran movement gets this money to represent it on Capitol Hill. And this man who is sitting in a prison now in Finland, he was in the United States last year, and he met with Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz. He's a right-wing Republican, not very friendly to Trump. And Senator Cruz, for some reason, took up the cause of Biafran independence, and now has submitted an act in Congress to fight Christian, or to bring to the attention of the government of Christian genocide taking place in Nigeria.
Mm-hmm.
And it proposes to have sanctions if Nigeria doesn't change its policy. The act has not been passed yet, but I believe Senator Cruz is the source of this idea of Christian genocide in Nigeria. It doesn't stop there, but this same lobby group, and I think Clarice will be interested in this, also has another client. It's the Ambazonia Defense Forces and the Amazonia Governing Council. Now, this group at this point is actually conducting a war. This Amazonia is the English-speaking region of Cameroon. And that's their client also. So they're being chaperoned throughout the halls of the Congress and everything, bringing their cause there. This lobby group also has a Eritrean government in exile client, which is also a terrorist group. And so it goes on like that. So, I should also mention the fact that on the Biafra front, there's just been a terror case in there where they convicted a leader of this Biafran group to life imprisonment for treason and launching a rebellion. And this man, his name is Kanu, actually has British citizenship, and he has a radio station called Radio Biafra, which is based in England. The company Radio Biafra is registered at British Company's House in London, and he's never been bothered at all by the British authorities. So there you have who's actually running these terror groups, and if you look at others, you're going to find these types of connections as well.
Okay. Still understanding the tactics of actually of war and how this implicates the global setting. And let me come back to you, Crystal. We know that the recent crisis patterning, the Russia-Ukraine has gained another momentum, and today we are in the phase of looking at, and people are asking questions if this is actually the moment for an end to the war, and we also want to come back to understanding how it works, about the proposed 28 bullet points proposed by the US-led administration of President Donald Trump, and also which comments have come from the Russian Federation. And then we want to look at how this, this tactic of war brings again more mayhem to the other countries, like, for example, the European Union and other member countries that had to succumb to the dictates of, the West, in line with their position on the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and how it is taking another dimension. What are the ramifications of such in a moment of this? Still looking at how some people still find themselves or their entire nation entrapped in this aspect of war.
Also, these peace plans from Trump had, how to say, leaked to the press. Honestly, I always wait for the originals to be published before usually commenting it, because we have seen in the past that the Western media have many times published such peace plans, which at the end were dismissed and proven to be just like fantasies of the journalists who wrote these articles. We have a big problem about that with all this propaganda war, because every war is beginning by killing the truth, by pushing propaganda to justify this war. And we see that here there is no exception. And unfortunately, a lot of Western journalists are wishfully playing this game, pushing a lot of lies, a lot of propaganda to push the agenda of the people who are paying them. So all these peace plans which have been pushed, of course, we know since the encouraged meeting between Trump and Putin that some kind of agreement has been reached, at least some kind of comprehension of what the deep problem is. And so I think, of course, there have been discussions on the main points to solve the problems. But as Vladimir Putin said yesterday, for the moment, the points of this plan, which is known from the presidential administration, have not been discussed in details with Russia, which means that for the moment it's like some kind of proposal from the US side, which is waiting for like at least some kind of approval from Ukraine before discussing it with Russia. And that's the problem, because these like indirect negotiations are leading to like a dead end, because they don't discuss with Russia. They push this to Ukraine to accept forcibly, but some points are like unacceptable for Russia. So then it comes to Russia, and Russia will say, okay, but this point, and this point is not okay with me.
Yeah.
So we have to review the plan, and then we have again to obtain the validation from the Ukrainian side. And so it's a very complex way of negotiating a peace deal. The very big problem also is that for the moment, Zelensky and all the people around him have no interest into signing a peace plan. First of all, because as we have seen with the recent corruption scandal, they are benefiting from war. They are making a lot of money. Zelensky, all the deputies of his party, and his ministers, advisors, they are all making big money, either taking some part of the financial help which is sent to Ukraine, or by reselling weapons which are sent also to help Ukraine. So we have seen that it's a very big business. That's the first thing. The second is that all this ideological war in Ukraine, which some of my colleagues said is ongoing since decades, the problem is it had radicalized a big part now of the Ukrainian society into a real neo-Nazi ideology. And the problem is these people will never accept either a capitulation or even like a peace deal where there is any concession in terms of territory. It has been said already months ago by one of the main Ukrainian neo-Nazis, if Zelensky is signing a peace agreement where he concedes some territory to Russia, he's a dead man. So, I mean, of course, Zelensky doesn't want to see his life ending so quickly. So, of course, for him, there is a big paradox now. We have seen that he made a very emotional declaration yesterday about having to choose between what he pretends to be the dignity and sovereignty of his country, or losing a very important partner. So it means the US is blackmailed, of course, by Trump to sign some kind of agreement because the US are seeing that the time is playing for Russia. Time is playing against the West. And so the more Russia is advancing, the more difficult it will be for the West to push Russia to sign any peace agreements. And we have seen that's what Vladimir Putin said yesterday. Okay, we are open to a peace deal. But honestly, when we see how it's going on the front line, we are doing it great. So as we see, we can obtain the results we want through military means. So Russia has no interest into signing a peace deal where she has to do concessions to Ukraine. I remember Russia is winning. I mean, it's not the winning side which has to make compromises and concessions to the side which is losing. It's the contrary. So I don't think that we will see soon a peace deal, because I think for the moment the situation of Ukraine is not desperate enough to put enough constraints on Zelensky for him to sign any deal, which will be dangerous for him, I would say, really, physically. So I think for the moment it will lead to nowhere. That's the first point. And the thing is, the more this conflict is ongoing, the more the third parties like European Union are suffering from this situation. These sanctions that they have taken against their own interests are now really striking the economy of the European Union, and as I said, the main countries like Germany and France. And that's why we see now these warmongering speech in the mouth of the German and of the French leaders, and that's very dangerous. My fear personally is that if Ukraine is losing brutally, ending with a very bad capitulation deal, that they will go really to war with Russia to erase the table, to tabula rasa, to erase everything and to continue to stay in power and make money and take the money from the people. So we see that war is really used also as a tool of internal politics in the West, especially in the European Union. And for me, it's really a bad thing and a very, very bad signal.
Absolutely, understanding war as to be used for different reasons or perspectives And this brings us again to with you, Julia Burke. We want to look at, from all that has been said, we understand that, asking a question of if the world can exist without war, it will be very difficult to say yes or no, given probably the intention behind war. And now let's look at how, shifting alliances in the multipolar world is actually affecting the dynamics of war and international politics, and probably the way forward, and how can this be navigated in the new world order. Your mic is muted, please.
No, she's good.
Thank you. Yes, I think that one of the key reasons is that the current economic system, the global economic system, is quite deformed and disbalanced. And for that reason, every now and then, wars are also needed, like big world or global wars are needed to reset the economy. Okay. That was the case during the World War II. That was the case during the World War I. And many of these conflicts, on the one hand, they do have very clear beneficiaries, and on the other hand, they do allow to reset the economy. And this is something that Europe at the moment, let's say the European Union, is in desperate need for, to reset and restart its economy, writing off all of the policy mistakes to the war that forgives everything, right? So when the system is designed and structured like this, specifically those systematic issues are leading to the need of wars. Big wars for global resets or smaller ones in order to achieve local economic goals, or more of tactical ones or midterm ones. So what really needs some kind of redesign and rethinking in terms of those systematic issues is the economic system and the way countries trade with each other and the way those international affairs are all arranged. Because it's okay to have interests and it's okay to be willing to get resources when you have none. But it's not okay to set up the whole manipulation system around it, saying that you're bringing democracy to some place when you don't even practice democracy yourself, and when people on the land maybe don't even need that, or don't need that model of democracy, or whatsoever else the nice sounding purpose is that is used to manipulate and divide and conquer, right? So I think that once the international relations are restructured in terms of financial systems and economy, then it would be only acceptable to achieve economic goals through negotiations, through trade, and through a more mutually beneficial dialogue. But of course, it takes two to tango. And since we still have, I mean, on the one hand, we have the oppressor, on the other hand, we have the victim. But it's valid for both parties that they have, the key role in the process. What I mean by this is that the countries that are more victims in terms of, being a part of the system dominated by the hegemon, or this can be, there could be different terms used for this, but it is important to change the behavior patterns on the other side as well. And I mean, China has been demonstrating that. India has been demonstrating flexibility, but still achieving its goals. Turkey has become a regional power because it was trying to use the conflicts between the global powers and their interests for their own benefit. And they have been in, let's say, working relations with conflicting parties as well, which allowed them to pursue their own interests. Russia has been resisting the pressure that has been all over the place for several years during this period of time when we are basically at war with all the NATO countries, and previously as well. So this kind of patterns, persistent, resistant, and the ones that allow to promote own interests, I think they are a way forward to creation of a more balanced and just economic system in the first place, and then international affairs system that would not fall into those manipulation traps and would allow for use of more of negotiations, more of trade deals, more of balanced interest models than the current system that allowed to do things in the dark, because people were either not knowing or else they were accepting the rules of the bad game.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it's about the rules of the game, and then we want to understand because. Hello? Of course, as I was saying, thank you, Yulia. We want to understand the rules of the game and looking at again this question, like the way to organize and control crisis, and of course the way to organize war and control it, and the effect of it on probably the intent. Coming back to you, Ashil Eki, we were using a clear example of. The African continent, and if we want to look at how war is used as a tool of conquest and of course control, we would take the case which we mentioned of Nigeria. We'll still go back to the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo to want to ask why it has been very difficult for neighboring Angola and other regional bodies to bring the warring parties together. But then we've been seeing news how the peace deal has been brokered between Congo and Rwanda by the United States of America. And this is an aspect of probably control, which still aligns, first of all, to our topic for discussion. If we want to look at the various forms of war, ideological war that we were talking about, in the sense that we cannot actually provide African solutions to African problems, yet bring in a third party that a whole lot of probably conditions will be attached to whatever trajectory of a solution is being proposed to solving the conflicts.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, sir.
All right, great. So, I mean, the question is very timely, because Africa needs to really find a way to have its own way of resolving its own conflict without, including external forces. If we talk about the conflict that you mentioned, the situation has been going on for years, and Congo is accusing Rwanda of embezzling its resources to be able to build its own economy, and then selling some of these raw materials to Europe, especially gold and all these minerals that are plentiful in Congo. And Rwanda is claiming that no, instead it's some of the Congolese that are trying to that are fighting Rwanda and trying to, exert some kind of pressure on the government to, to do a certain number of things. And so this has been going on for years. And so the United States stepping in, trying to solve this problem has become very complex because, the U.S. is coming in with, with something behind his head, which is to get as much in terms of resources as possible from Congo, given the fact that China is becoming a very difficult partner or different. China is going toe to toe with the U.S. Because of this tariff issue that U.S. is slapping everybody with today. So China has been reluctant to sell its own minerals to the U.S. I know discussions are ongoing, but in the meantime, U.S. is trying to find places where they can get those rare earths minerals that are very important to its military industry. And so, it's going to be difficult for that peace to be realized because of the interests of the United States and that are not always aligned with the interests of the two parties. But I would suggest that this conflict be resolved between Africans, and that I think we've had some initiatives from different leaders, South Africa, who came in, who even sent troops, to help solve this issue, but things have gotten out of control there, and so the new government in Congo also has not been very practical, very pragmatic in trying to, understand, what the international community can bring forth, to help to solve the issue. They have not been very, astute, in trying to use that community. But they have been, completely aligned with the West on these issues, which is creating a lot of tension within Congo itself. Within the previous government, also Kabila, who was sentenced to death, I believe. And in a situation where the country is in a deep crisis. So the way they've gone about it also is not very appropriate, especially when you're in a conflict with a neighbor. But I think there's opportunity here to involve more leadership in Africa. People who have more, gravitas, who are more respected. And maybe partnership with business community. The business community also may help. We've seen Dangote, building, infrastructure in that whole area, and maybe that could also persuade some of the leadership in that region to, instead of fighting for minerals, they can work together and benefit, because, every country in Africa has resources. It's just a matter of using them to their benefit in an appropriate way. There's no need to be stealing, to be fighting over the resources. We can share. We have enough. God gave us enough for thousands of years to come. And so I don't see why we have to go into fighting. But in order for us to be able to get to that peace, we have to put together some kind of strategy, led by some leaders that are really respected in the community, in the different part of the continent. Even business, partners can also chime in and try to exert pressure on both sides so that they can come to an agreeable, solution without involving the United States. Because once the United States is involved, we know that's 1,000% its own interest, and they're not just necessarily aligned with our interest.
And of course, this comes to note that Africa still has a long way to go, and there is neither to international politics to understand the tactics and work for the benefit of the continent, having one agenda, like Christelle noted earlier on, that sometimes we have internal war for political gains, and it brings us again to how the war rhetorics and how it is impacting politics in Africa. Still in the same light, understanding the war probably philosophy with you, Dean. Let's look at the financial or the economic consequences of war on the population, probably to meet or serve the interest of the limited financial elite. We'll take an example according to Alexei Moratov in his book. I will always love to quote, Change the World Together. He made mention of how crises are being, created and controlled, looking at the economic crisis of 2007 and 2008, where you see a scenario where money is being, maybe loans are given to people who cannot pay. And at the end, those with the high interest rate, they can't pay, and the property is being recovered and put on sale at, how this actually affects the, the population. And for example, we saw already, and we are already witnessing the effects of the trade war between China and USA on Americans, because from research, Americans at this particular juncture are not actually, having their favorable lifestyle in terms of the purchase of products coming especially from China. So let's try to understand this tactic and the way forward that will benefit, because we are looking also at the ramification of this on the local population, how it will benefit the citizens and not just politicians or the collective elites. Your mic is muted, dear Dean.
You mentioned the financial crisis of 2008, and you referred, I believe, to the mortgage-backed securities crisis, which threw people out of their homes. Now, and this is global. It wasn't just in the United States. It was in Europe and in the entire West. The financial banking system is the Western financial banking system has become a casino. What you had in the past, before 1999, the banking system was different in the United States and in Europe. You had a separation between commercial banks and investment banks. And in the United States, you had a policy called Glass-Steagall, a law. And under that law, the commercial banks could not engage in speculation. They could not take someone's mortgage and securitize it. It was very simple at that time. You got a housing mortgage from a bank, and every month you paid your mortgage fee. And if you came to a problem, you go down to the bank and you talk to the banker about it. That changed, and all the banks became investment banks. And that led to these huge banks, and particularly in Europe, which have assets on their books that are more than the GDPs of their countries. But this was pure speculation, and it collapsed. Now, what my friends in the United States and here in Europe, my political friends in the Schiller Institute, they proposed again to reintroduce bank separation. And this would have a profound impact, not just on the banking system, but on the political power that these financial interests held, because they could not make the huge amounts of money that they've been making through this speculation. So one way to deal with that is to introduce this type of legislation, where you get back to actual banking, commercial banking without speculation. Now, this had an effect. This speculation has a direct effect on Africa and countries that in Africa and Latin America who have to borrow dollar-backed or hard currency-backed loans. This drove their interest rates up, and their loans themselves became objects of speculation. For instance, if you look at the debt structures of these many countries in Africa that have to go to the IMF to arrange a bailout of some sorts, what you find is that the money is owed not to the original bank or the original group that the loan came from, but that loan was already sold to someone else, and now you're paying someone else, and this makes the situation even worse. So we need this type of banking reform, because if we get the West back to this type of banking, then we will stabilize the economy. And of course, the other side of it is that the most radical right-wing elements, war party elements, are linked to these financial institutions. If you look at Germany, you have this Chancellor, Merz, who thinks I don't know who he thinks he is, but he talks about, we have to go to war in 5 years, but we got to make Germany the most powerful country, military in Europe. Well, this guy comes from BlackRock. He was many people probably know what BlackRock is. It's one of the biggest investment holdings in the world.
$11 trillion.
Yeah. And this is who Merz is, right? And if you go, even Trump has this problem. He is from New York. And he has top financiers as cabinet ministers. There's tremendous interest. These financiers finance the right wing, the war party think tanks. There's a tremendous amount of power because they have all this money, which is really not solid money, to say the least. And at this point, we can see before us a possible financial collapse, like we saw in 2008, but much worse.
Yeah.
So that's what the situation is, I believe, in this whole, when you look at the financial situation, and the effects that has on people.
Dean, it's 13.46 trillion in assets that BlackRock manages. 13.46 trillion.
Okay.
Yeah, that's.
I had to check on that.
Actually,
I totally believe you.
Yeah.
There was a time when a chancellor in Germany had always been a politician. He was you have, I think, 14 different states in Germany. And usually it was before he became chancellor, he was like the premier of one of these states. They were always involved in politics.
Right.
So they were much closer to the population. But now these guys are parachuted in from BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, you name it.
Yeah.
And that is why we continue to analyze the implications of it and alluding to probably connecting it to the topic for discussion. Coming to you, Christelle, with all that has been said regarding war, financial war or trade wars, proxy wars and all this, let's try to understand now, because when we talk war, we imagine peace and then resolutions or conflict resolutions. With the intricate web of the war and the intention behind wars, can we actually, probably in terms of international conflict resolutions, that is the role of the United Nations Security Council and other bodies that have the powers to negotiate among parties at the loggerheads. Can we talk of a real neutrality, showing that with war comes as a tool to attain an objective?
So, as we see, unfortunately, since years, all these international organizations like the United Nations have proven to be inefficient, to speak gently. We see now it's not the UN which is negotiating the peace between Russia and Ukraine. We see that it's the United States which are trying now to salvage what is possible of their project, because we have to remember this war was initiated due to the action of the US in Ukraine. The thing is that now they see that this project is taking water and drawing like the Titanic, so they try to save what they can. That's the main point of these deals. The thing is that I really think that the situation in the world will really change once the process of moving from an almost hegemony to the multipolar world, then only we will be able, I think, to see a more stabilized world. Because once the relationships between the countries will be more based on respect and not imposing its own interests on the detriment of others, then I think we will see more and more the power of diplomacy coming back on the scene. For the moment, the problem is the West has imposed its hegemony after the fall of the USSR, and has, how can we say, like, given the bad example to the world on how not to behave. They have sown chaos everywhere in the world, and we are now paying for all this. We now are facing the consequences of all this chaos. So I think only when all these countries which are responsible for this chaos are put back to their place in the world and limited in their possibility to continue sowing chaos, then I think we will have a world, I will not say where there is no more war. I think, unfortunately, there will still be still wars, because at some point there is always, some conflict between countries that some countries will try to solve by force. Sure. But I think we will see much less of this, because countries will understand that they can work together for mutual benefits. That's something like countries like Russia or China have understood, and in the direction of which they are working, building commercial ties with not only neighbors, but like China, building roads between countries to improve all the trade. Because when you make trade which is mutually beneficial for both the parties, then you have no interest into doing war, because you can achieve your aims in a peaceful way, which is not destroying your country, which is not destroying your economy, which is not destroying your population, your infrastructure. Because I think at some point, so we are now in this very chaotic phase of transition, where the hegemon is trying to keep its grip on the world, sowing chaos everywhere to try to somehow pretend they have some kind of control on this chaos. But I think after this phase, we can expect a world where the international organization will come back to the important role they had when they were created, and which was supposed to be when they were created. The problem is the West has taken control of a lot of these international organizations, turned them into puppets with no power, and completely extract anything really concrete from this organization. So they cannot achieve anything. They are just empty rooms with some resolutions which are not taken into account. We have just to see how the sanctions have been taken against Russia. Normally, by the international law, it should have been done by the Security Council of UN to be legal. But they have taken, tens of thousands of sanctions against Russia without the approval of the UN. And that's a big problem, because it means then the UN is not in capacity to put a stop to that, to say, oh, guys, no, it's not okay. You cannot do that. And, so I think we will have also to rethink these organizations after this transition period. And I think we have to begin to rethink these organization now, so then when this transition period is ended, when we are really in a multipolar world, we already can begin to make the changes which are necessary for the big comeback on the international scene of the diplomacy and all of these international organizations, which should never have been taken their authority and mechanism of to preserve peace in the world.
Absolutely. It's about peace in the world, having a win-win cooperation, of course. But then the quest for power and control, will that permit that the world functions well with little or no instances of actually violent wars? And this brings us again to you, dear Julia. Christelle just talked about a revolutionary era, and then we still want to look at how these changes can come about, because when the new world order, talking about multipolarity, talking about trust in terms of international relations, we now want to look at institutions that can foster the philosophy that will benefit the population, and not just a selective or a collective, a few with financial strength that can do and undo, probably make decisions having, effect globally. Here we want to look at probably understanding the definition of a war of opportunity, and how this will probably align with the traditional rules-based order, to be able to look for a solution that will mitigate these very radical wars that will always have, an uncontrollable effect on the population.
Well, I think it's not going to be about institutions, but it would be about people. Because in modern day, we have instant information exchange capacities, and we have a very flexible system that is capable of adjusting to a highly unstable environment. So institutions are failing, and institutions will always be much slower than communities. Institutions imply quite a lot of bureaucracy, and for a global institution to more or less establish itself, it takes a decade, even now, because institutions function in the very same way they used to be. We see now the tremendous impact of social networks on the minds of the people, on political processes, on social processes. We see tremendous changes in mentality that do take place over a year or two, if you follow the dynamics of those changes. So I think it's going to be about people. And another factor that, in my opinion, contributes to that is that if several decades ago, if you look at a typical career of a person, mostly it was developing within the framework of maybe even one organization per life, or maybe just a few organizations per life. Now you have a lot of more people that are independent, cooperating with different structures, changing their career paths at different points in time. And the way the professional market is structured right now is very different. You will not see too many examples of people being committed to the same organization for 10, 20, 30 years as it used to be back in the day. So I think it's going to be more about new principles, more about communities, self-organizing communities, and other flexible structures that are using a lot of digital tools that would be much more functional. And I suppose that one of the reasons why the UN is not the one resolving many of the conflicts is to have very sophisticated, complicated procedures. And if on the one hand, we can look at it as a result of, a long-term evolution and whatsoever else, on the other hand, people working in the UN are limited to quite a small group of those who are capable of integrating into a system full of, you know, such detailed procedure rules and whatsoever else. I mean, anyone who has ever seen the procedures of UN hearings and the rules to them, it's like, you know, a document that is over 100 pages. And in order to say a word, you need to follow a procedure that is very complicated and sophisticated. Of course, it does not allow for quick decision making. It does not allow for, fast-tracked processing of information. And while you're preparing for something, Trump has already tweeted 10 tweets, and the stock markets have gone crazy. And, you know, people are preparing for self-defense in case of nuclear war. I mean, it's the processes are just different. And the future is, is up to the leaders, up to communities, and the growing average consciousness of people due to the access to information, education, and creation of content is definitely playing its important role.
Talking about access to information and helping especially the grassroots to understand the changes at the global level, to be able to define internal narratives. I will come to you, Mr. Ishil Eki, because this is a very important aspect that is affecting especially the youthful population of the African continent. I don't know if I should take an example of probably the Republic of Cameroon. When you look at the aspect of selective exposure, you understand that the media in Africa, or particularly in Cameroon, has a role to play to be able to educate, inform the people to align with the rules of the world, and not actually on probably the traditional dictates of events. I think at the moment, most countries in Africa are still trapped because they are still living with the theoretical framework of aspects. And then we are seeing drastic changes happening at the international level, just to protect the interests of the states. So how can we probably help the African media to draw that agenda for the African continent, that I think the right agenda will help mitigate some of the internal conflicts that we have, and draw a new trajectory of politics across the continent?
Well, that is a very good question, Clarice. I think the role of media has always been very okay. Why am I too close? It looks like I'm too close there. I don't know.
No, it's okay this way.
Okay, let me bring it down a little bit. Okay.
Yeah.
So the role of media has always been very, very important in conflict resolution. Not just in Africa, across the world, but it's also been a tool for conflict creation.
Absolutely.
So because of all these, all these propaganda that are thrust on people every day, every night, all day, it's that propaganda has effects, and we've seen, for example, in Rwanda, what the role of media has been there for to create the environment for genocide to happen. Absolutely. Right? So in Cameroon, there is the level of corruption that exists in the media is just so much that you really don't know, what the media are, what is the role of media anymore, because very few medias are serious, are very organized to allow the public to really get the news without being led one way or another in one or many directions. So it's very complicated, and we always say that the media doesn't live out of society. The media reflects what the society is. And so if there's rampant corruption, it also happens, affects the media. and it affects the news that the media puts out there. And so Cameroon just had an election, a presidential election, for example, right? So and there are different views on the situation right now. There is a government, the president that was elected, that the Supreme Court has proclaimed as the winner of the election, but the political class and the population, a good part of the population, disagree with that. They claim there was so much fraud that it's not possible that Mr. Biya could be re-elected, given his age, for example, given what he hasn't done for the past few years. And so, and Mr. Chiroma, who is the one who claimed to be the winner, has left the country, and he's trying to figure out how he can get get the people to fight and bring him to power. This is all very complicated. So that means he's going to, they're going to engage in negotiation. I mean, what I've heard, they've engaged in negotiations, and the media has been sharing that negotiation, the aims of the negotiations. And I don't know, it seems like it has stopped. And so people are.
There's actually a proliferation that we have at this particular moment, and that is the one aspect that I see how probably the aspect of internal politics or personal gains, and how it is probably challenging the position of a nation faced with external, external challenges.
Yes, and so that is the issue, and so all these. In the situations that the situation I'm talking about between those two leaders who claim to be leaders, they have an effect. It has an effect on the country and the way people behave, and the media also is taking sides. And so we are going to see a situation where we may get out of control. The situation may get out of control if people don't come to their senses and understand that we only have one place, one country, and that we need to, make sure that everybody is exercising restraint and doing what is appropriate for the country without, going to the extremes. So, and that happened also in Rwanda. It happened in various parts of the continent, and the media has a very eminent and very important role, because if they don't report the information appropriately. Now, not everything has to be reported. That's also a responsibility of the media.
Absolutely,
if it's something that is not good for the community, for the people to hear or to know, then it's fair to censure that. But we don't just share everything for the sake of sharing because we are journalists. Media have that role to play. But the most important aspect of the role of media is to provide a responsible news, responsible information that will help further the positive growth of the country and its citizens, instead of dividing them, instead of exacerbating tensions or divisions or pain points. But so that's what I would say about that question. But I think it's far from from being achieved at this point, and we have a lot of concerns right now with the role of media in the continent, and this is a lot of work that journalists themselves have to do.
Absolutely.
To fix that.
I think it's the moment of rewriting the tenets of journalism across Africa. If we want to actually make the voice of the continent heard at the international level, because the continent is a major player in terms of geopolitical competition and others, it is imperative to master the game, as was said, for the benefits of the country, continent. Coming back to you, Dean, we have talked about war, its sustainability, the tactics, and then we cannot really go without looking at probably the global arms factory. Those who produce the weapons. This is in line with military war, and also want to also look at the biological war, and then the benefits of such, and peace, which will now come at stake. And of course, what is the probability with the new world order, as we were talking, like Julia said, that it will warrant principles, new principles to reshape this world and not just institutions. So let's look at the correlation between the global arms factory, the peace, and of course sustainability of this peace if we want to put humanity first. Your mic is muted again, please.
Back in 1956, I'm sorry, 1960, just as he left office, was leaving office, then President Dwight D. Eisenhower warned the country of the military, what he coined the phrase, the military industrial complex. And that's what the military is. And in reality, it's not really military or industrial, it's financial. In the sense that it's the most powerful interest in the country tend to be the financial sector. And they're the ones that actually captured defense policy, so to speak, for their own purposes. And they created this, because it's not just building weapons, it's creating an entire militaristic ideology. And this is the big problem. Making weapons in itself is not it's an industrial thing. It's probably a waste of money. But as people have said in the past, it's the whole question of intent. And in the United States, it really dramatically changed American society, the whole Cold War. The United States, prior to World War II, always had a very small, not always, but it quite often had a big Navy. But the military was extremely small, and it only expanded in time of war. And after World War II, this changed with this Cold War. And we have similar problems, and of course in a different way, in other countries. The problem in Africa, of course, is outside interests financing insurgencies. We have a problem in Sudan, as everyone knows. It's the government on the one hand, led by General Burhan. Many people might not like this government, but it's the government's there, and then you have the so-called rapid support forces.
Sure.
Are totally financed out of the United Arab Emirates. And if you read analysts, they will say, well, the UAE is fronting for the British. And in fact, that is the case.
Mm-hmm.
So if you pulled out these foreign interests, which are generally old imperialists, you might be able to get a solution to these problems.
Of course, pulling out foreign interest as a way towards resolving a conflict or ending or mitigating war with you, Crystal Niet. We'll now look at the proxy nature of the world, and that should be last year, 2024, when Joseph Borrell was talking. I always want to use his word, like he said, the European Union or other stakeholders involved in the crisis in Ukraine is not there because of their love for Ukrainians, but it's for proxy interest. And now we want to ask this question directly. Do you think the end to the Ukrainian crisis will come when, the third parties pull out of the conflict?
I think there is two options for the end of the conflict. Either it goes until the moment Ukraine goes like in complete military failure, and it ends with a very bad capitulation for Ukraine. That's the first scenario. The second scenario is, of course, is if Europe is stopping, increasing the stakes. We have seen already that the conflict is already evolving after the US have begun to get back some of the help, under Joe Biden. So they were providing Ukraine with a lot of financial and military help, which was taken from the American budget. Now they have moved the burden to the European Union, which is not able to afford such a big amount. We see that there are a lot of temptation to use the frozen Russian assets to finance the help to Ukraine, because the European Union leaders are seeing that even by taking all the money they can from the European Union citizens, it's not enough. It's not enough. They will have social unrest, and still it will not be enough. So we already see that Ukraine is already suffering from the less resources that it obtains now from its Western partners, because now Europe has to buy American weapons, which before were provided for, let's say, for free to Ukraine. So we already see that if one of the third parties from this proxy war is beginning to make step back, it's already getting the end of the war closer. So of course, if the European Union is stopping its help, it's the end. Ukraine cannot continue on its own. Without all the West behind to provide weapons, to provide money, Ukraine is a failed state. So, of course, if the European Union is saying, okay, we stop this, we have no more the means to continue this help, it's the end, then it's also the end of the war, immediately. Without the insistence of the West in 2022, with this visit of Boris Johnson, we say, don't sign any peace agreement, we will give you money, we will give you weapons, and you will fight till the end, till the last Ukrainian. The thing is that, unfortunately, I don't see such a scenario out of some possibility that at some point all this help is so much damaging the economy of the European Union that they will prefer to, how to say, to throw the baby with the bath water instead of facing much tougher consequences in internal politics. Because the risk of social unrest is very big. We already see in countries like France that people are not okay with the fact to continue paying for Ukraine, especially after the last corruption scandal, which involves people who are close to Zelensky. So we see now that there are very few options to end this war. Either Trump is able to push Ukraine to sign the agreement, but I don't think there are more chance about it, or European Union is making a step back, but this also has very few chances. Unfortunately, from what I see, all this has come to a very ideological point of view. European leaders have repeated many times that the defeat of Ukraine would be the defeat of NATO, it would be the defeat of the European Union, and of course they cannot accept that. So they have blocked themselves in a dead end. And unfortunately, when you put yourself in such a position, the way to get out of it will not be bright and will not be good. So I unfortunately expect that the bigger, chances, probabilities will be that unfortunately they will push Ukraine until the point that the country cannot continue to fight anymore and will completely collapse, both militarily and economically, from all this war, and will have to sign a very bad and shaming capitulation.
Very problematic indeed. We are culminating with this discussion, so I'll come to each one of you for the last analysis for today on this particular topic, because subsequently we'll continue to observe the events, how they are unfolding, and continue to bring forth constructive analysis, educating, informing, and leaving people with an opportunity to make decisions based on the realities. I start with you, dear Yulia. From all that has been said already, we can attain that conclusion to say that war is actually a central part of politics, especially at the international level, given its competitive nature. So what is the proposed solution to actually mitigate these occurrences of war of any form in a new world dimension?
Well, there was a recent public statement by Vance, and it was quite funny because he said that Ukraine and Russia should trade and cooperate and develop their humanitarian ties and whatsoever else. Mm-hmm. And this was quite hilarious given the context and given the rhetorics that everyone was quite used to. But definitely that's the way forward, because when you have economic ties, when you have trade, when you have humanitarian ties that Russia and Ukraine had to a great extent, and I mean, we have family ties that are so intersected that sometimes it's really hard to say who is Ukrainian and who is Russian. You know, it's pretty much the same shades of the very same thing. So this, I believe, is the only way forward anyway. And even though the statement thrown into the public space by Vance to many sounded ridiculous or not realistic, that's what it was, and that's what it's going to be anyway. And that's the only way to avoid confrontations and conflicts when you have bigger issues that are more important, and you don't want to get into a conflict because you don't want to lose benefits, because you have the ties, because you have the understanding, and you have shared strategic goals. I mean, Russia and China could have been in conflict as well, because Russia has what China needs to a great extent, right? Resources and territory, and there were historical conflicts. But still, there is a mutually beneficial economic way forward that is found when China benefits from cheap resources and Russia benefits from goods and parallel imports and many other things that China has been providing, especially since the beginning of this special military operation. So even though, you know, conflicts could be possible between almost any country, I mean, the way that the nation states are designed and the borderlines do already contain a lot of potential conflict and potential escalation points, because it can never be fixed once and forever. And if 100 years ago we had how many? Less than 100 states on planet Earth, on the political map of our planet. Now we have almost 200 of them, and there is a tendency for creation of smaller and smaller and smaller states, right? Sure. And things like nation identity are being built to those, and more of, separation and division is happening in order to create new entities and call them states later on. So the current trend is not for unification, even though we do have regional alliances of different shape. But the current trend is for creation of more and more little states. And this is doomed for conflict, because little states cannot survive on their own. They cannot be completely autonomous, and there will always be some kind of a struggle for resources unless there are clear rules of the game for trade and development of overall strategic goals and following those.
Indeed, it's about strategic goals and what is beneficial to the continent or probably the country and the population. And it brings us to you, Mr. Ashiu Eke. When we want to look at war, we see that it's actually an integral part of politics, like has been underlined. If we want to take from the last statement of Yulia, like the strategic goals of a particular nation, what do you think, in your perspective, it should be that strategic goal for the entire African continent? Because if we want to bring our analysis enshrined in the dictates of Pan-Africanism, it warrants that we should talk holistically as a continent, and then looking at those institutions that can chart categorically and strategically the African agenda. As we are actually on this platform, we are aware that the Republic of South Africa is hosting the G20 summit, and this is the first of its kind on the African soil. And it also comes at, there is some sort of war of words, which I can call, between the South Africa, the Republic of South Africa, and the United States. And you see that officially the US is not really present at this very important gathering. So with all that has been said and all understood about war and politics and how diplomacy plays in, what is that take-home package that will resonate not just to the global audience, but particularly to the African continent major stakeholders? Your mic is muted, please.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to give some statistics about global wars for the past 200 years, for example, right? So United States is leading the pack with about 224 military conflicts, right? That is the most, from one country. And United Kingdom is following with 171, wars or in 83 interventions, between the segmenting between wars and interventions. And France also had dozens of wars, colonial wars, about 50 plus interventions. Russia, Soviet Union's 25 interventions, and so on. So from an African perspective and from Pan-Africanist perspectives, war too often is imposed or perpetrated by external powers, right? So it serves as an instrument of domination, and that is going to deepens Africa's challenges and undermines the unity, the development, and the sovereignty of the continent. So Pan-Africanists, stands for indirect opposition, to that legacy. So the ultimate response is clear and uncompromising. Africa must refuse to be a battlefield for the ambitions of others, and reject war as a mechanism of control that we see, that has been used against us for the past 200 years. So instead, the continent should harness, its diversity, its history, its shared destiny, to build peace and foster collaboration, and as well as drive sustainable prosperity. So for Pan-Africanists, the solutions are dialogues, integration, innovation, solidarity, and that's part of what we call the Mahat, the Mahat, philosophy that our ancestors used before, long before colonization or slavery started. So those are the antidotes for division and exploitation. So to finish my point, true power for Africa is going to be lies in not in war, but in rejecting external manipulation, in standing together, as a unity, as a united force, and forging also a future that will be built on unity and self-determination. So that's the path forward for Pan-Africanists, are a powerful force today on the continent.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Hickey. Coming to you, Jean, for your final conclusion on this topic. And we want to look at the preventive as well as the opportunity war, and probably getting from you the real theory or principles that can guide international politics in today's world, while limiting the effects, particularly on the population, since war is something that is already inevitable, as from what we can conclude from our analysis which we had today. Your mic, please.
Harley brought up the question of the Treaty of Westphalia, where you had a 30 years war, a religious war, and it ravaged Europe. I mean, it reduced the population significantly. And the warring powers came together. I think it lasted 3 years, the conference. And they hammered out a peace agreement. The fundamental principle was that each nation should look towards the interests of the other nation. And that's precisely what international affairs should be based on at this point. And economically, it's clear. I mean, a vibrant, unified continental Africa on the world stage would be a tremendous effect on world peace. And it would provide a tremendous economic partner for Europe and the United States, where, it won't be this zero-sum game, but it'll be two countries cooperating in developing each other. Because world trade has been hijacked by the financial system, and it is utilized for speculation, commodity speculation in particular. But world trade should be part of the division of labor, where countries cooperate for the development of one another. Mm-hmm. And this is the only way you're going to guarantee the end of war. And this is what we need now. I mean, our former colleague said, one of our colleagues, Ms. Berg said that pointed to a statement by Vice President Vance about Russia and Ukraine cooperating economically, and there's no reason for not, because they were cooperating for 1,000 years before the NATO expansion policy, and this is the only. I believe this is the only way out. The only way to stop this constant.
Absolutely. And to end with you, Christelle, as a journalist, we also know that, like Mr. Eke highlighted already, communication has a greater role to solving or mitigating the wars across the globe. So, in your own perspective, knowing that war seemingly is probably is inherent in nature, and as a result of probably it comes as a result of some dynamics which are not very complementary in politics. So how can the media, the role of the media, particularly alternative media, play in this strategic era to mitigate especially psychological war, which sometimes it seems to be more dangerous even because killing the mind is killing a complete human being alive.
the media are not only part of the psychological war, they're also part of the physical war. As I said, the first victim of war is truth. We have seen, as in the previous decades, how lies made by authorities and not challenged by the media led to the complete destructions of many countries, including in Africa. It was the case for Libya. It was the case also in the Middle East. I mean, I have to remember this big lie about the mass destruction weapons of Saddam Hussein, which was the official reason to attack Iraq. Uh, More than 1 million civilians paid of their life this lie. That's why the role of the media is so important. In the new world which is building, we really have to get rid of all these deviations from the rules which should be for all the journalists. We have seen how especially the Western media or the media supported by the West, so financed by the USA, the Ned, and so on, have propagated a lot of lies, including now against Russia to justify supporting neo-Nazis in Ukraine. And for me, I think there was not enough done. Perhaps 80 years ago, during the Nuremberg trial, only the main propagandist of the Third Reich was sued and condemned for his propaganda. I think that really there should be something done against the people who have closed their eyes, who have lied, who have propagated fakes into the media, in the mainstream media, which have led to wars all around the world, allowing for killing of a lot of innocent people, because their role is not small. Even Julian Assange said, every war begins with the lies. Every war begins with lies, and that's where the alternative media are so important. We really have to develop a very big amount of alternative media, and we have to build them in the spirit of cooperation, respect, and work together that we want to see in a political level in the world. It means I think all these media should be like a living example of what the international politics, the international diplomacy should look like. So respecting each other, each with its interests, but not, walking on the bands of the others, while working together in a spirit of cooperation, of mutual beneficial cooperation. And I think on this, that's something which is already building, as we see. We see a lot of cooperation between media in Africa, in Russia, and some alternative media in Europe. And I think we should continue in this way, because the media have a very big role into helping people understand what is the real situation, building their own opinion. And at the end, it is the people who will push to end this cycle of non-necessary wars by understanding all the causes and consequences of these artificially built conflicts.
Okay. Which is very imperative, of course. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for today, and especially to this esteemed panel for the great insight, historical backgrounds, alternative analysis of what the world has as information pertaining war, and I continue to appreciate your time and your insight as we continue to inform, educate the people in a more complex society. I want to thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for being part of this program. And from the analysis, we can already conclude that war actually is already an integral part of politics, and now it warrants countries to be more strategic, to define national interest, so as to mitigate the negative or adverse effects of war and engage in more constructive war that can help attain the interest of a state for the benefit of the population and not for a selective few. Thank you, and I wish that you have a lovely moment in the company of programs on Pan-African media, and we'll come back to you subsequently with the very vital and timely topics as we continue to change the way we think and do or probably act towards the events around us. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you, Jean.
Thank you.
All the
Esther,
best.
bonsoir.
Okay. Have a good weekend.
You too. You too.
This program was brought to you by Globus.